Hey everyone, welcome to Recombinant Teaching. I'm your host, Justin Schaefer, and on this show, I'm holding STEM Education Office Hours where I'll unpack your questions on STEM pedagogy, student success, academic careers, and everything in between. I've taught about 10,000 students in my 13 career, and just like you, I've spent countless hours in the trenches working with students, helping them learn how to succeed in college and beyond. Through hosting this show, I hope that we can learn from each other, solve some problems, and share some tips and advice, and ultimately improve STEM education together. If you have a question you'd like me to tackle, check out my website or the show notes and click the Submit a Question link. Whether you want to write in, send an audio clip, or join me live, I'd love to have you be a part of the show. And with that, let's get started today. All right, so we have a live guest today on this show, and our guest today is Colleen Kelley, otherwise known as Chemistry Colleen. She's a PhD and retired chemistry professor and current elementary school science teacher. So, I'm a higher ed guy, full-time college professor my whole career. I do have children of my own, so I know about elementary school, but I don't think I could ever do it myself. So I'm excited to talk to Colleen. So Colleen, you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're up to and what you're passionate about?
Sure. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, as you said, it was unexpected for me too to transition from teaching 24-year-olds to 4-year-olds in about 4 months after I retired.
Wow.
But I became passionate about observing. I taught organic chemistry for about 30 years in higher education. And those are some of the best and brightest students on campus, arguably. And yet year after year, there was about, 50 to 80%, failure rate, depending on what their measure of success is, right? So I'm not defining failure. They are defining themselves.
Yep.
And so again, you talked about the thousands of students, thousands and thousands of students. And what I came to recognize late in my career is students are coming to college or university, and they're what I call now molecularly illiterate, right? They haven't spent
Sure.
enough time with the periodic table. They don't understand the symbols for the elements. And so we're delaying molecular literacy till high school. That would be like delaying literacy until high school, right? If
Yep.
we taught the
Makes
alphabet in
sense.
11th grade, surely they would struggle as freshmen and sophomores in a literature class, right? So there's a disconnect between K through 12 and higher ed in this molecular literacy and what students are coming to college with. And so they're on shaky ground with the language we're using. They're not on shaky ground with their ability, with their mathematical skills, but just with the language. So when I learned that, that's when I really decided where could we start this? And I looked at reading. And when there's a transition from learning to read, and then you're reading to learn, that's about third
Yep.
grade. So I developed a curriculum based on my research to be launched in about third or fourth grade. And I thought, well, I'm retired, so why don't I try this out myself and see what
Good
it's
for you.
like? Because, you can't, I think it's difficult to hand K through 12 teachers stuff, right? Unless you've done it yourself. So now I'm seeing all the ins and outs of elementary school and what it means to be an elementary school science teacher. So that's where I am right now.
Oh, I love that story, Colleen. Thanks for sharing that and that transition. And you said, yeah, you kind of got to live it, right? You got to be in the trenches. You got to do it yourself to have people maybe kind of listen to you or kind of respect your credibility. Yeah, when I first started teaching human anatomy at UC Irvine years ago, I'd never even taken an anatomy class, let alone worked with a cadaver or anything. So the first thing I did was go to the med school and said, hey, can I get in the cadaver lab? And they got me in there. I got over my fear of that and learned how to dissect a body. And then I felt like I got a little bit of credibility to teach that darn class then. So, well, I feel like you should be the one answering questions today with your tremendous background in chemistry and chemistry education, but hopefully I can answer a question for you too. And we'll probably go back and forth on it. But yeah, what do you got? What's on your mind today?
Well, I love the title of your podcast with the office hours, but also your whole platform on recombinant. And what I'm wondering from your perspective, is there the equivalent of this like lost foundation or fundamental that you're uncovering when you're developing college level or university curriculum? Is there something that is missing? And if it is, have you identified it?
That's a cool question, and I've not really thought about it that way in terms of, what's missing, although I think a lot of people do kinda try to figure out, is there one thing we can add in, that's gonna really change things, and I love, again, your idea of molecular literacy on that idea. I guess one thing with kind of literacy, I'll go with this angle. This thought came to mind. Back when I was at Irvine again, I worked a lot with Julie Ferguson in Earth Sciences and Cameron Denaro. She's a wonderful statistician and education researcher, and we did this project looking at scientific literacy in general.
Uh-huh.
So there's this paper you might have heard of. It's called the TOSLS, the Test of Scientific Literacy Skills. Okay,
Right.
yeah, you're nodding. Great. Okay, awesome. So this is from Peggy Brickman and Kara Gormally. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But they developed this 28 item, questionnaire, really a survey test, if you will, that you can give anyone. It doesn't have to be college students, but they developed for college, and that you can assess student scientific literacy skills. And it's on like 7 or 8 different dimensions. Graph reading, critical thinking, hypothesis testing, experimental design, things like that. And well, we wanted to start using it with these large populations of students at Irvine. Especially, I also taught a lot of non-majors biology classes. I taught a big enrollment course called the Biology and Chemistry of Food and Cooking, and it was for strictly non-STEM majors. Super fun class, right? Got to talk about food and everything, and how that works with the molecular level. But I always wanted to know, well, how can we promote scientific literacy skills? And even in my majors classes, I really promote scientific literacy because, well, you can kind of look stuff up in your pocket, right? You got now, and now so, in your earbud, you just ask your AI assistant to tell you whatever you want, Neuralink coming soon. But you can just look things up. So you have to be able to, but do the skills. That's what's really important. And I
Mhm.
think you'd probably agree with, again, the work you've been doing with reading at that early grade level, getting these skills down. So we did this big study, and I'll put the link in the notes too, but we found basically, I think it was like 800 to 900 students, maybe even more, I can't remember. But we looked at major predictors of what contributes to scientific literacy. And you might think of the typical culprits like math ability would be high, which it was, but the number one predictor was SAT reading score.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, it's kind of maybe makes sense when you think about it, but to take a paragraph of scientific text that's associated with a multiple choice question and to unpack it, especially if there's data, you got to be able to read well. You got to be able to critically understand and comprehend. And that was the number one predictor. So when I talk to faculty in my workshops that I do, especially in Gateway STEM redesign that I do a lot of work nowadays, I tell them, yeah, math skills are important. Yeah, problem solving skills are important, but don't forget about reading skills. Don't forget about reading comprehension and helping students promote that. And I had a faculty member once tell me, what about listening skills even, right? So being able to stay focused during class. So I think some of these maybe, we might call them soft skills or whatever, but the fundamentals really, right, are really important to become a successful STEM major or just college student in general. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think that's what the reading is what led me to molecular literacy. I'm a first generation college student, and my parents were insurance agents, worked in a nursing home, no science at all in my home. But I read all the time, and I read mysteries because I love solving puzzles. So I still am I read everything I get my hands on, and I love reading fiction, nonfiction, but just reading for fun and enjoyment. And when people ask me what got me into science, it really is mysteries, solving puzzles and mysteries. And I put together science with that. And I thought, oh, this is kind of like what Miss Marple's been doing all along in this Agatha Christie novel.
Yeah.
And I could pretend I was Miss Marple as opposed to a scientist because that was my connection to solving puzzles. And I land on that because I think reading is essential. And I no longer think it's a soft skill. I think it's really the skill to create a platform for learning anything, but particular science when the vocabulary then becomes just oppressive after a while.
Oh yeah.
And we use the same. You're more in biology. When I'm working with students, I still tutor quite a bit, and they have endergonic and
Hmm.
endothermic, right?
Yep.
And if you're a chemist, it means one thing. If you're a biologist, it might mean
Yep.
another thing. And they're like, well, I know it's heat, but what is it? And so our vocabulary is intricate and it's also nuanced. And So if the reading level is not high, I think that's difficult. And I love the point, and I almost cried or cheered. I'm not sure. You said, uh, I haven't taken a math course since 1985. I'm an organic chemist, right? And so when
Mhm.
people casually say to me, "Oh, you must be good at math," I don't know whether I am or not. I haven't tested that in dozens of years. So I think math is becoming this. We need to dislodge that. You can be a scientist and have good quantitative skills, and you can develop those quantitative skills. Good at math doesn't mean good at science unless you can read.
Yeah. That's yeah, well said, well said. Yeah, and so many strings there to unpack. I wish this was like a normal interview show at this point. Maybe we should do another episode and just
Sure.
dive in. I think that'd be fun. But yeah, I totally agree with the math points, the reading points, and how you can't really do one without the other as this foundation. So and that's why I developed these reading guides to help my students read the textbook, because they really are learning a new language, whether it's chemistry or biology, right?
Mhm.
And so I'll put a link to that in the notes too. And I'm sure you have tools that you with your curriculum will link to as well for everyone to
Thank
take a
you.
look at that. Of course, of course. Yeah. So thanks for joining today, Colleen. That was, again, I think you're more of an expert on this than me, but thank you for asking for my advice on that question. And I'm glad we were able to dive into reading a little bit there. And again, everyone, check out those notes for all the links and more information on all the great things Colleen is up to. So that's it for this episode of Recombinant Teaching. If you want to be a part of the show, check the show notes for the link. Also, check out my website if you'd like to learn how I can work with you, your department, or your institution to improve STEM education. Thanks for listening and happy teaching.